High above the Xylo's heart world, the bridge of the Resolute shrieked with the sound of buckling hull plates. Blood, thick and dark, masked Elias Thorne's left eye as he gripped the command console. "All ships, full burn," he croaked into the comms. "Into the center. Now." He didn't look back to see if they followed. When the price of peace is a life you've only just begun to value, would you pay it? Let's look back at how this union of blood began. That same metallic tang of ozone. Kaylee's had first tasted it 2 years ago, standing on her balcony as the Terran ship pierced the clouds of Ethelgard, a blunt iron needle stitching 2 worlds together. Kaylee's Vora was 19, a child by Luminarchy standards, and her father, Sovereign Theron, had traded her like a piece of border territory. She stood in the great hall, her silver skin reflecting the harsh glow of the Ethel suns, watching the Terran delegation approach. Elias Thorne didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who had spent too long in small, dark rooms. He wore a simple, charcoal-colored uniform that lacked the refinement of Ethelgardian silk. In the silence of the hall, a rhythmic, mechanical tick-tick-tick echoed from Thorne's wrist. It was a primitive Terran watch, its gears grinding out the seconds with a persistent, tiny friction that felt intrusive against the humming crystal displays of the palace. Kaylee's focused on that sound. It was steady. It was honest. When it came time for the union ceremony, Elias stepped forward and took her hand. His palms were covered in rough calluses, the skin textured like ground stone. The sensation sent a jolt through Kaylee's. In her world, skin was a map of status, soft and unmarred. His hands told a story of labor and tactical necessity. Sovereign Theron was speaking, his voice a melodic hum that meant absolutely. The chime of a Priority 1 data burst shattered the Sovereign's sentence. A ripple of confusion moved through the nobles, their violet eyes widening as the central holographic display flickered to life. It wasn't the expected wedding imagery. It was a star map of the rim, and a cluster of systems was turning a bruised, necrotic black. Beneath the shimmering dome of the spire, the air suddenly tasted of ancient pride meeting sudden, visceral terror. Archon Valerius, the Sovereign's primary advisor, stepped forward, his lip curling. "A communication error from the border colonies," he announced, though his fingers trembled as he cleared the screen. "Nothing to concern our guests." Elias Thorne didn't look at the Archon. He looked at the map, his gray eyes narrowing. Kaylee's watched him and realized he wasn't surprised. He was calculating. While the Ethelgardian nobles smoothed their robes and whispered about the breach of etiquette, the Terran commander was already mentally at war. The feast that followed was a performance of normalcy. Kaylee sat beside her new husband, watching him navigate the complex Ethelgardian dining rituals. He didn't fumble. He moved with a quiet, observant grace that suggested he had studied them for months. "You've practiced," Kaylee said, her voice barely a whisper above the music. "I don't like being unprepared," Elias replied. He glanced at his mechanical watch, then back at the Sovereign. "Your people believe sovereignty is a gift of history. On Terra, we learned it's something you have to defend every hour." "The Xylos are a myth," Kaylee said, trying to convince herself. "A ghost story from 3 centuries ago." Elias finally looked at her, his gaze heavy and unblinking. "Ghosts don't consume 3 planets in a week, princess. The Xylos didn't fight like the Luminarchy. They didn't care about the aesthetic beauty of a pincer movement or the dignity of a broadside. They were a recursive biological algorithm designed for one purpose: consumption." Kaylee's found Elias in his cramped quarters on the 3rd moon of Ethelgard. The air in the room didn't smell like the jasmine incense of the palace. Instead, it smelled of recycled Terran coffee, sharp and bitter and profoundly grounded. He had spent the last 3 nights mapping the attrition rates of the border fleets. When Kaylee's entered, he didn't rise. He simply pointed at the tactical projection where the Luminarchy's honorable formations were being picked apart like slow-moving fruit. "Your admirals are trying to win a duel," Elias said, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. "But this isn't a duel. It's a harvest." Kaylee's watched his hands move over the interface. He spoke of the Xylos hive mind, explaining how the creatures functioned as a distributed network where the destruction of individual nodes only optimized the remaining swarm's pathing. To stop them, one had to overload the network's processing capacity by striking the Queen node at the Heart World. It was a suicide mission. The Ethel Guardians considered such tactics barbaric, a human stain on the art of war. Kayleigh took his data to the High Council anyway. She shouted until her throat burned, throwing the cold, Terran math into the faces of ancient men who preferred a beautiful defeat to a gritty victory. They gave Elias a fleet of relics, damaged cruisers and conscripted crews, and told him to be the bait. And now, on the bridge of the Resolute, the bait was being taken. The hull groaned, a deep, metallic scream that vibrated through Kayleigh's boots as she watched the swarm engulf them. If he died here, Kayleigh's would finally be. The proximity alarm shrieked, cutting her thought short as a Xylo suicide drone breached the forward viewing pane. He was right. The swarm faltered. Far across the sector, the Luminarchy's main fleet had finally used the opening Elias bought with his own blood to shatter the Queen node. The hive mind was a singular consciousness, a psychic tether that allowed millions of autonomous units to move as a fluid, lethal mass. Yet this very interconnectivity became its greatest vulnerability once the primary processor was extinguished. They broke. He had used the Terran philosophy of total war, a doctrine that regarded everything as a weapon and every life as a potential expenditure, a cold, mathematical brutality that the Ethel Guardians found both repulsive and terrifyingly efficient in its ability to solve a problem their ancient honor could not even comprehend. Kayleigh watched the Xylos drift into catatonic shock. The victory felt like a layer of ash over her heart. Kayleigh sat in the silence of the recovery suite. Elias's hand felt like warm, textured stone in hers, the calluses a permanent record of the friction he had endured to save a species that still didn't trust him. Beyond the window, the two suns set behind the crystal spires. The golden light touched the scars on his knuckles, casting long, dark shadows across the floor. We'll be here tomorrow to see if the Luminarchy learns to live with the man who saved them. Do you think some victories cost more than they're worth? Come back then and let us know.